Good evening, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. Today evening, it's not Mr. Botin who is welcoming you. The French Embassy, Institut Français en Inde, is very pleased to welcome you at the Alliance Française of Delhi for this writers, etc. You know, it's a collaborative project between the embassy and the Alliance Française, and it's now a very important writers, etc. for us, because we are welcoming Ananda Devi. Ananda Devi, who has just came back from Jaipur. Ananda Devi was the French invitee in Jaipur, the French guest by the French embassy, and we are very, very honored that you are here, ma'am, this evening, and it was a pleasure to have you in Jaipur. You can see on internet, in the press, a lot of articles about what Ananda was speaking about in Jaipur, all the success she had with thousands of people wanted to speak with her and to be in interaction with her. Today evening, we are also very pleased to have you, Vijaya Rao, to have Professor Rao in conversation with Ananda. Professor Rao is teaching in GNU. She's teaching French. She was leading the French department in GNU during some years, and it was of the most important professor for French literature in India. So it will be a pleasure to have you tonight. Enjoy the conversation, and you will have an interaction with you after that question and answer. Et bonne soirée.
Bonjour, good evening. I know the weather doesn't really lend to a very warm ambience, but I think we are well here in this auditorium. I am honored and privileged to have Ananda Devi here in conversation with me. Ananda Devi, apart from being a prominent writer, is also a good friend. And it's not the first time that we are in conversation with each other. So it's always a pleasure, you know, to have her here today. And I also know that there are many students from JNU, and we have studied her works. So I think it's really an honor for me, Ananda.
Yeah, I have a special story, a history with JNU. So it was the first time I was invited here was to address the students. So yeah, I have a special affection for the students of JNU.
Okay, maybe I would begin with an introduction to Ananda. For those who are not familiar with her works or about her, a short introduction. So Ananda was born in 1957 in Mauritius, and an island particularly notable for its confluence of diverse ethnic, cultural, and linguistic identities. Her family hails from Andhra Pradesh in India. She speaks Telugu, Creole, French, English,
Not
Bhojpuri,
really.
and Hindi.
Don't believe everything.
Ananda Devi won her first literary prize at the age of 15 for a short story in a Radio France International competition. She pursued her studies in ethnology, anthropology, and obtained a doctoral degree from SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. Ananda moved to Ferney-Voltaire, close to Geneva, and works as a translator with the United Nations. Her best-known novel is perhaps Le Voile de Draupadi, but with Arbre Fouet and Moi l'Interdite, she was identified as a Mauritian francophone writer. With an increasing readership, both popular and academic, across the French-speaking world, Devi's next novel, which was Pugly and published in 2001 by the leading publishing house in France, Gallimard. And then she soon published other works like Soupir, La vie de Josephin le Fou, and the collection of poetry called Le Long Désir. Her next novel, Ève de ses Décombres, was met with tremendous critical acclaim. This was followed by Indian Tango, Le Sari Vert, and the most recent novel, Les Jours Vivants. In most of her works, the island of Mauritius acts as a backdrop. The themes that she has worked on include, of course, femininity, women, but also madness, trauma, illness, disability, prostitution, adultery, and homosexuality. In spite of the focus on representations of suffering and the struggle for autonomy, at times one sees examples of extreme violence and destruction in her writing. She's acclaimed really for her intimate, poetic, and lyrical style. She has won many prizes. I'll just mention a few. In 2001, she had the Radio France Prize, which is for le livre de l'océan Indien for moi l'interdite. In 2006, she got the Prix des 5 continents de la francophonie for the novel Ève de ses décombres, and many other prizes that followed. I'm also happy to share perhaps the fact that Ananda Devi is known to the Indian reader through JNU, perhaps maybe, pull the blanket of it to aside. And Professor Madhavan, who's here, is perhaps responsible for bringing her to JNU on 2 occasions. One for a Francophone writers meet of the Indian Ocean. And the second one I organized, which was Francophone women writers meet, which was in 2007, where she was one of the participants. I think the Indian Ocean became, in Francophone studies, one of the main areas and where one could identify, perhaps also because of the large population of Indian origin in Mauritius. So this makes the event a very special one for us, because here we have the French component as well as the Indian element in her works. And so let me begin by asking you, Ananda. You studied in Mauritius in English in your primary and secondary school. However, you chose French, which was your second language in school, but you chose French as your language of writing. So what dictated this choice? At what time did this happen? And are you happy with your choice? Because I know you're equally comfortable in English.
Thanks, Vijaya. And first of all, I'm extremely happy to be here. And I've had a wonderful few days in the company of Judith Oriol and Mr. Max Craudet at Jaipur. I was first in Calcutta. So, I've had time to sort of find my feet again in India. Although I'm very much of a hybrid creature, as you said, between France, Mauritius, India. So I don't know, maybe I write because I have to find out who I am through the books, or take the identity of other people so that I can find their voice and my own through them. So yeah, the history of languages in Mauritius is very complicated, because obviously it was an island that was not inhabited before colonization. So it was first originally discovered by the Arabs who were exploring the Indian Ocean, and they called it Dina el Arabi. But they didn't stay. And then the Portuguese also rediscovered the island, but they didn't stay. And it was the Dutch really who gave it its name. But it was the French who were actually the true, real colonizers. The Dutch only left one imprint. It's that they made the dodo become extinct. And the famous phrase, dead as a dodo, comes from the Mauritian dodo, which the Dutch sort of ate or destroyed massively. So, in fact, the first real colonizers were the French, who not only started the sugarcane cultivation, brought in slaves from Africa, East Africa, but also left a very, very strong cultural imprint through the language by starting the very first newspaper in sort of in the 19th century, early 19th century, and then the British took over because Mauritius was a sort of key strategic point in the Indian Ocean on the way from Europe towards India and China before the Suez Canal was opened. So there was a naval battle between the French and English, and the English took over until the independence of Mauritius in 1968. So we have the French component, English component, the African component, and then the Indians came as indentured laborers, mainly from North India, from Bihar, but also quite a lot from South India. And my great-grandparents on the maternal side went from Andhra Pradesh to South Africa. In fact, they were eloping, because they were not allowed to get married, so they took the boats that were carrying migrants away, and they went to South Africa. So basically, I'm sort of, the third generation on my father's side, born in Mauritius. And as a child, just now when you were saying I spoke Telugu, I was saying, I sort of jumped because I don't. I mean, I did when I was very small, my mother used to speak Telugu to us. But then, when you start growing up in a society where people don't speak that language, generally you go to school, you learn French, English language. I actually lost it, and it is something I regret very much. But as a child, you don't realize the importance of what could be called the mother tongue. So I tend to say that that Creole is sort of part of my mother tongue, and Telugu is the void, in me about when I speak about mother tongue. But French is the language of the heart, I can say.
But you do understand Telugu when it's spoken, or not
very,
much?
very little,
I think you're being modest.
No, not really. But actually, it happened that a few years ago there's a French newspaper that asked me asked a few writers to write about their relationship to French and to languages in general, and that newspaper is Libération. And while thinking about it, I was thinking back about these childhood memories of learning Telugu, speaking with my mother, and suddenly a sentence came to me, which was, I'm called Ananda Devi, but at home they used to call me Renu, and I remembered when she taught me this sentence, which is Renu Kalamutiskra, which means fetch the pen. And it just came out of the blue. I had never thought about that sentence, and it came out, sort of maybe 6-7 years ago. And suddenly I thought, well, maybe, in a way the pen replaced that mother tongue I lost, that she gave me a kind of mission that I've been fulfilling all the time. So, yeah, it was sort of a kind of consolation to think of that. But to come back to this sort of what I've sometimes called a symphony of languages that you hear all around, so that in a way you sort of are attuned to all languages. When I started going to school, we actually, it's a sort of English-based system, but most teachers use either Creole or French as a medium for teaching. So, in fact, you're learning, your books are all in English, but you're hearing actually, I mean, in the school I went to, I was actually hearing more French, and we were speaking French with our friends. So it was actually the medium that we were learning in while writing in English. So it was really bizarre, but it helped to actually have an extremely good grasp of both languages from almost kindergarten onwards. And we also read a lot at home, and at that time there wasn't television, there wasn't, you had, when we were on holidays, my sisters and I, the main, leisure was to read. So we used to borrow books and bring back the books and sort of, and my parents also were quite avid readers. And I was born in a small village in Mauritius, and when my father went to the capital city, he used to buy books, tons of books and brought them back. And they were completely sort of an eclectic taste. There could be sort of thrillers, Agatha Christie, Arthur Conan Doyle, but there was also Victor Hugo, there was poetry by Baudelaire, there was the 1001 Nights, which was an extraordinary discovery for me, really a marking time of my discovery. So, and then my mother used to tell us all the stories of the myths, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata. And, well, to come back to your question after that long digression, the two languages of reading that I first used were English and French, but somehow, as a child, maybe around the age of 7, I started writing in French. So I wrote poetry, fairy tales, I drew cartoons, and I used to make my little books, and staple them and illustrate them. And it was sort of, it grew up with me. And somehow, I think French had some kind of resonance maybe in my way of thinking, or maybe the musicality of it. It remained from that time onwards. So throughout my life, it has never been a question in a way. Maybe it chose me in a way rather than me
kind of a
choosing
natural progression towards
Yeah.
the language. But you never tried to write in English?
Yeah, I have tried, and I do occasionally. I've written short stories in English, and I've translated one of my own novels into English. But it's still, I mean, for example, when I was translating the novel, it was very exciting because, in a way, the whole process of discovery of the novel, which was happening when I was writing in French, that was already done. So I could actually concentrate on the process of writing. How do images happen? How does where do they come from? And I found that actually I use a lot of the music of languages when I'm writing. So in French, you have almost like poetry, that you have alliterations and a certain word attracting another, not for the meaning, but because of the sound. And in English, other images were arising. So it was a pretty free translation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ananda, if you allow me, I'm going to ask you a question that I did ask you in 2007. Of course, let me share this with you. It was during this Francophone Women Writers Meet, and we had Nicole Brossard from Quebec, who is a firebrand feminist, and we had Paul Constant from France, and Ananda then from Mauritius. And most feminists in Canada, the French-speaking feminists, do have a problem with the French language, I mean, they find French as a very sexist language. So my question then to the three of them was that, do you find any constraint in writing in French? Or does French allow you that space that you want to express yourself and your ideas, about women or femininity or feminism in French? So I know I asked you at that point, but I would I'd like to ask you this question again, because the audience is a different audience. I mean, what is your take on this?
Well, the short answer is no. It's not a sexist language. But the long answer is that I don't know why the Quebec people feel like that about that, but maybe it's about the history. The history that's a very heavy charge for them about sort of defending the language against English, for example, but at the same time feeling that they're not quite sort of on an equal standing with the French. I'm not sure where that idea came from. But the other aspect is that it is a colonial language. So for many people, writing in a colonial language means that in a way you are you're still perhaps subservient. So in a way, if you take the two aspects of the male being dominant and the female being subservient, the relationship between colonizer and colonized is a bit that reflects that. But first of all, as I said, when I started writing, I was very young, so these ideas were not there at all, because it was sort of in a state of innocence, if you like. And secondly, I don't think languages shouldn't be made to bear the weight of history, because languages are there. They're, on the contrary, they're bridges. So why associate or identify language with a past history? We are speaking in English today. There's a heavy history of colonization, but the language is free. You can free the language from its bounds. And to me, language is a gift. So all languages are a gift. It so happens that this is my instrument of writing, but it could have been English, it could have been Telugu, it could have been Creole. So therefore, I've never had that sort of relationship with it, and I don't think a language is sexist. I mean, honestly, I did say no at that time. I still say no. How can it's really the way people perceive things.
Well, I asked you this question because, I mean, as a woman writer, having said that, maybe I should just share a couple of examples of two Indian poets who wrote in French, and how the two of them, who are no longer there with us now, found a kind of a liberating factor in the French language, and about how French helped them, in fact, to speak about this whole notion of freedom. Because I mean, let's also look at history from Enlightenment onwards. I think France did represent, values of equality, of freedom, and therefore human values of universal nature. So we do have examples, in India also of these poets who wrote in French and how it did. So I don't think I'm just not generalizing. I just asked you because you're a woman writer.
Yeah, I would also add to that sometimes when you're writing in another language, I mean, it wasn't the case for me, but many other writers who actually change at some point or start not writing in their mother tongue find a freedom in the subject matter or the way they can write. And I have a friend who's a writer from Madagascar,